This story is titled, My Stepbrother Kicked Me Out of the Family Dinner I Personally Funded While the Whole Family Supported Him. But now he's single and in jail, crying for my help. Hey everyone, my name is Marcus Thompson and I'm 29 years old. Recently, I got invited to my brother's engagement dinner. And like any good family member, I showed up ready to celebrate with everyone. What I didn't expect was for my brother to seat me by the trash can while he flexed for his future in-laws, and then try to stick me with the entire bill at the end of the night. I looked the waiter dead in the eye and said, "I'm not with this group," then walked out. What followed was a complete meltdown that didn't just cost him his fiancée, it exposed his entire fraudulent operation. But before I get to that spectacular crash and burn, let me give you some context about who I am and how we got to this point. For the last 8 years, I've been working as a deep-sea commercial diver. I'm not talking about the cushy recreational diving that people do on vacation. I'm talking about actual underwater welding and construction work, where one wrong move means someone doesn't make it back to the surface. We're talking 16-hour shifts in conditions that would make most office workers quit on their first day. The job is absolutely brutal, but the money is excellent if you're smart about managing it. While my college buddies were busy racking up massive student loans for degrees they don't even use, I was banking serious cash from day one. I own my house outright in a decent neighborhood in Tampa. No mortgage, no roommates, and zero debt hanging over my head. I drive a 2019 Silverado that I paid cash for. It's nothing flashy, just a reliable truck that can handle Florida's storm seasons without breaking down or leaving me stranded. I converted my garage into a home gym that would make most commercial fitness centers look like they're stocked with toy equipment. I've got a full power rack, competition-grade bench, enough weight plates to sink a small boat, and a deadlift platform I built myself that can handle the 620 pounds I pull on my best days. When you work as physically demanding a job as I do, you need somewhere to channel all that energy when you get home. And having my own setup means I never have to deal with crowded gyms or equipment that's not maintained properly. My family, on the other hand, comes from a completely different world. My dad runs what he likes to call a luxury car rental business. But what it really amounts to is flipping repossessed vehicles on credit and crossing his fingers that the market doesn't crash before he can move them. He hasn't turned an honest profit since 2015, but he still drives around in a leased Cadillac and wears these ridiculously expensive designer suits that make him look like he's being slowly strangled by overpriced fabric. My mom's full-time occupation seems to be pretending to be high society at wine tastings where her actual purchases cost less than what most people spend on appetizers. She's got the whole act down to an art form. The subtle but expensive jewelry, the practiced laugh that suggests a private school education she never actually received, and the ability to make small talk about wines she's never tasted with people whose net worth she'll never approach. Then there's my younger brother Tyler, who's 27 years old and introduces himself at family gatherings as a real estate mogul and CEO. What that actually translates to in reality is an unemployed mooch who's been living in our parents' converted garage apartment for years. The same garage apartment that I renovated with $28,000 of my own money during a particularly weak moment about 4 years ago. Tyler still lives in that garage space completely rent-free, of course, and has the audacity to call it his investment headquarters. The only thing being invested down there is time into video games and the slow cultivation of mold on his unwashed dishes. Dad introduces him as the real estate prince at church functions, while Mom still does his laundry and cooks his favorite meals every Tuesday. They treat him like he's the second coming of Donald Trump, while I'm just the blue-collar disappointment who pays for everything but gets zero respect in return. I've become nothing more than the family ATM with a pulse. Since 2019, I've been keeping track in a spreadsheet like the absolute idiot I apparently am. And the damage is genuinely brutal to look at. Over 4 years, I've handed over $15,100 to Dad for business taxes he somehow forgot about. Another $9,400 to Mom for her emergency surgery, cosmetic dental work, and Botox treatments, and a staggering $31,800 to Tyler, spread across 13 different business ventures that all evaporated like morning dew the moment my money hit his accounts. That's nearly $56,400 over 4 years that just disappeared into the family money pit. Not a single cent has ever been returned to me. Hell, I haven't even gotten a genuine thank you beyond the immediate relief they show once my check clears their bank accounts. It's been the exact same story since I started making real money in this field. The calls always come at precisely the same time, just after payday, like they've got my direct deposit schedule taped to their refrigerator as a reminder. It's always an emergency, Always something that can't wait another day. Everything is urgent. Everything is just this once. And there's always a promise that they'll pay me back when things turn around. The worst part is that I knew exactly what was happening the entire time. I wasn't blind or stupid about the situation. I just had this deeply messed up sense of obligation because that's what family does, right? Like I somehow owed them for raising me, even though what they mostly raised was their own expectations of what I could give them financially. Last February marked what I now realize was the beginning of the end, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I was working a night shift on a deep-sea platform during a particularly brutal storm season when we had an equipment failure on the diving bell. Metal fatigue had been accelerated by constant pressure changes, and a hydraulic line gave way completely. A section of heavy cable whipped across the platform like an angry snake and caught me square across my left side. It snapped 3 ribs clean through. And I'm telling you, the pain was unlike anything I'd ever experienced before. This wasn't the muscle burn you get from a heavy workout or the dull ache that comes with a long shift. This was white-hot lightning shooting from my chest all the way to my fingertips, stealing my breath and blurring my vision with each attempt to move. They had to call in a Coast Guard helicopter to get me to the nearest hospital with a trauma center. I needed surgery to repair internal bleeding and reset the ribs properly. The doctor, a no-nonsense woman with forearms that looked like she climbed mountains on weekends, told me it would be 8 weeks minimum recovery before I could even think about light duty. She was very clear that if I rushed the healing process, I risked permanent lung damage and reduced capacity on my dominant side for life. I was back on site in 10 days. Not because I was healed, the surgical staples had barely been removed, but because my crew was short-handed during the spring rush when demand spikes and everyone's pushing to hit quarterly quotas. Plus, workers' compensation only covers so much, and bills don't stop accumulating just because you're injured and can't work at full capacity. You want to know how many times my family visited me during my recovery? 0. Not once. Not even a single phone call to check how I was doing. Dad was apparently swamped with his end-of-quarter sales push. Mom had her spring charity wine circuit to attend. And Tyler was busy networking in Miami on my parents' dime. The only person who showed up was Luna, a 26-year-old trauma nurse at Bay General who works emergency shifts that would break most people. She drove 2 hours through a thunderstorm after pulling a 14-hour overnight shift just to help me shower because I couldn't lift my arm above chest level. On day 5 of my recovery, while I was half-conscious on prescribed painkillers, a card arrived from my family. It came in a light green envelope with a cartoon dolphin holding a "Get Well Soon" balloon. Luna had to open it for me since my fingers weren't working properly yet. Inside was a note from Mom written in her flowing handwriting that said, "Hope you're healing fast. When you're back on your feet, can you look at the pool pump? It's acting up again. Also, we're short on the garage apartment utilities this month, about $420. Thanks. No, how are you feeling? No, we're worried about you. No, can we bring you anything? Just a goddamn to-do list and an invoice disguised as concern for my well-being." When Luna asked me what the card said, she just stared at me for a long, uncomfortable beat. Then she crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash without saying a single word. Later that night, when she thought I was asleep, I heard her on the phone with someone. Her voice was low but intense as she said, "They don't even care that he's hurt. They just want to know what he can do for them. It's sick." The next morning, while she was changing my bandages, Luna finally said what she'd been holding back. "You know they don't love you, right? They love what you give them. There's a difference." I didn't defend them or try to argue. I just let those words hang in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Because deep down, I knew she was absolutely right. The recovery process was absolutely brutal. I had to do physical therapy exercises 4 times a day, learn to do everything with my right hand since my left side was still compromised, and sleep upright in a recliner because lying down sent sharp pain shooting through my ribs. Through all of this, my phone kept lighting up with texts from my family members. But they weren't asking how I was doing or if I needed anything. Every single message was just a variation on, "When will you be back at work?" The translation was crystal clear. When would the money start flowing again? 3 months after the rib break, with my chest still not quite right and physical therapy exercises becoming a permanent part of my daily routine, Tyler got engaged. I found out through a group text that included professional photos attached. The pictures showed them posed on a yacht in Key West at sunset. Tyler wearing a linen shirt I'd never seen before with his arm around a redhead in a white sundress and designer sandals. Her name was Sophia, and it turns out she came from serious wealth. Not new money or social media influencer wealth, but generational compound interest accumulated over decades. Her father owned a chain of luxury resort hotels across 4 states, the kind of family that doesn't talk about money because they've had it for so long they don't need to think about it. Suddenly, Tyler was acting like he'd just been drafted first round to the NBA. He started posting entrepreneurial wisdom on LinkedIn, using phrases like wealth mindset and success attracts success, paired with photos of him in hotel lobbies he didn't actually stay in. This is the same guy who hadn't held a job longer than 4 months in his entire adult life. And now, he was suddenly positioning himself as some kind of business guru because he'd managed to bamboozle a rich girl into thinking he was something special. My parents were eating it up like it validated all their years of enabling his behavior and treating him like royalty. 3 weeks after the engagement announcement, Mom called me. Her voice had that extra layer of artificial sweetness that always meant she wanted something significant from me. They were hosting an engagement dinner for Tyler and Sophia, a private event at an upscale restaurant downtown called Meridian. 7:30 p.m. sharp, cocktail attire required. I simply said I'd be there, not bothering to ask any follow-up questions. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Make sure you wear something appropriate. Sophia's family is very refined, and do something about those hands. Maybe get a manicure. They look so industrial." Yeah, because the same calloused hands that had paid for her kitchen renovation might somehow offend the delicate sensibilities of these wealthy people. But I swallowed the insult like I always did, biting back the response I really wanted to give. The night before the dinner, I got a call from Uncle Rick. He's my dad's older brother, a retired Army veteran who did 4 tours in Iraq before transitioning to private security work. He's the only member of the family with an actual spine and the only one who doesn't speak fluent bullshit as his primary language. "They're expecting you to cover the bill," he said, without any preamble. No hello, just straight to the point like always. "How would you know that?" I asked, already feeling my gut tighten with a familiar sense of dread. "Your mom called me earlier, fishing to see if I'd help you out since you might be tight on cash after the injury. She said the dinner might run $5,000 or $6,000, and they wanted to make sure you wouldn't make a scene about it when the check came." I didn't say much after that conversation. I just thanked him for the heads up and hung up the phone. I spent the entire night pacing around my living room, trying to decide what I should do. Part of me wanted to simply not show up and leave them all hanging with no explanation. But another part of me needed to see just how far they'd actually push this disrespect. I needed concrete confirmation that I wasn't imagining the way they treated me, that it really was as bad as it seemed. So I decided to show up at Meridian at 7:27 p.m., fashionably late, but not late enough to cause a scene. The valet line looked like a luxury car dealership showcase. Range Rovers, Mercedes G-Wagons, and at least 3 Maseratis lined up like trophies. Mine was the only pickup truck in the entire line, which should have been my first clue about how this evening was going to go. I handed my keys to the valet like I owned the place and walked in with my shoulders back, carrying a $150 bottle of champagne as my contribution to the celebration. Meridian occupied the top 3 floors of one of the tallest buildings downtown, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a 270-degree view of the city that looked almost unreal in the evening light. The main dining area featured a long rectangular table arrangement with seating for about 22 people. Crystal glasses were catching the light from multiple chandeliers, and the fancy silverware probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. I walked up without any fanfare, champagne bottle in hand, ready to blend in and celebrate my brother's engagement like a normal family member. Tyler spotted me mid-sentence while he was talking to someone, and I watched his expression shift almost imperceptibly. There was a tightening around his eyes, a slight downturn at the corners of his mouth that lasted for maybe half a second. Then the mask slipped back into place and he smiled, though it definitely didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, hey, big guy," he said, with that fake enthusiasm people use when they're trying to manage a situation. "We, ran out of room at the main table." He nodded toward the far side of the room, away from where all the other guests were seated. "There's a spot for you over there." I turned to look where he was pointing, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. They had placed a single metal chair at a square service table directly adjacent to the busing station. I'm talking about right next to where the servers were scraping leftover food into industrial waste bins. There was no tablecloth, no place setting, no silverware, just a metal chair, a plastic cup of water, and a front row view of the restaurant's waste disposal system. I was literally 8 feet away from where half-eaten steaks and congealing sauce were being dumped into trash cans. I looked back at the main table where 22 pairs of eyes were watching with varying degrees of interest or discomfort. Mom gave me that tight, close-lipped smile that people use when they're silently begging you not to make a scene in public. Dad suddenly found his napkin absolutely fascinating, studying its folds like it contained the secrets of the universe, and he couldn't look away. So I sat down at the trash table. Not because I accepted this treatment or thought it was okay, but because I wanted to see exactly how far they would push this humiliation. I wanted to see how blatant the disrespect would get before someone, anyone, acknowledged how completely insane this situation was. I needed to prove to myself once and for all exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. The answer, apparently, was somewhere below the busing station, but slightly above the actual garbage bins. I sat there in complete silence for nearly 4 hours while 22 people feasted on what was clearly an incredibly expensive meal. I watched them work through 6 elaborate courses of food that probably cost more than most families spend on groceries for an entire month. I didn't get offered so much as a piece of bread or a glass of water beyond the plastic cup that was already sitting at my table when I arrived. From my garbage-adjacent seat, I could hear snippets of conversation drifting over from the main table. Tyler gave some speech about family values while Mom dabbed at her eyes like this was the goddamn Academy Awards. Meanwhile, I was close enough to the busing station that I occasionally had to lean away to avoid getting splashed by sauce being scraped off plates by the servers. The whole situation was so completely absurd that it almost became funny in a dark, twisted way. These people who claimed to be my family had literally seated me next to the trash and were acting like it was perfectly normal, like I should be grateful to even be in the same room with them. Around the 3-hour mark, I checked my phone and saw a text from Luna asking, "How's the fancy dinner going?" My reply was simple and to the point, "They sat me next to the freaking trash." Her response came back almost instantly. "Are you kidding me? Get up, walk out. They don't respect you and never have." A few minutes later, I got a message from Uncle Rick. "How's the royal feast treating you?" I sent him a single sentence in response. "I'm literally sitting next to a garbage can." His reply was just 4 words. "Take pictures. Trust me." So I did exactly that. I took subtle snapshots that wouldn't attract attention from the main table, one of my metal chair and bare table, one of the elaborate main table 20 feet away with its fancy place settings and floral centerpieces, and one of the trash bin directly behind me where servers had been scraping plates all evening. I didn't feel angry anymore at this point. Instead, there was this strange calm, like I was watching all of this happen to someone else. Like I'd finally stepped outside the delusion and could see the situation for exactly what it really was. It was approaching 11 p.m. when they finally finished their elaborate dessert course. I had been sitting at that same metal chair for over 4 hours, watching, waiting, and saying absolutely nothing. I hadn't been offered so much as a bread roll or a glass of wine during the entire evening. Then my answer about where I truly stood in this family came in the form of a waiter approaching my table, looking distinctly uncomfortable. He was a young guy, probably working his way through college, and he was holding a black leather folder in his hands. "Sir," he said, his voice professional but clearly tense. "The final bill for the evening comes to 5,341.87. Would you like to handle that now, or—" His voice trailed off as he waited for my response. I opened the folder and carefully scanned the itemized list. Premium liquor charges totaled over $100. There were multiple $140 steaks listed, appetizer platters at $95 each, desserts running $40 per person, and a service charge that was already included in the total. I didn't react outwardly or show any emotion. I just quietly closed the folder, placed it on the metal chair next to me, stood up, and said in a completely normal conversational tone, "I'm not part of this group." The silence that followed was absolutely complete. The jazz quartet had taken a break between sets, so there was no background music to fill the void. Half the table turned toward me like synchronized swimmers, responding to some invisible cue. Mom started blinking rapidly, as if trying to process what she had just heard. Dad froze with his wine glass halfway to his mouth, like someone had hit a pause button. The waiter hesitated, his eyes darting nervously between me and the main table, clearly unsure how to proceed. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" the waiter asked, needing clarification. "I didn't eat, I didn't drink, I wasn't seated with the party, and I'm not covering their bill," I replied clearly and calmly. Tyler leaned forward then, placing his forearms on the table with that familiar smirk he always wore when he thought he had the upper hand in any situation. "You're seriously doing this right now?" he said, his voice loud enough for everyone in the restaurant to hear. "Come on, man, don't be a dick. Just pay like you always do." I met his eyes directly and held his gaze. "No." That was all I said. No lengthy explanation, No raised voice, no dramatic speech about years of built-up resentment and frustration. Just a simple, clear refusal. Tyler's practiced smile faltered slightly as the reality of the situation began to sink in. He glanced sideways at Sophia's father, who was now frowning and clearly starting to realize that something didn't add up in this whole family dynamic. Mom jumped into the uncomfortable silence, her voice unnaturally bright and brittle with barely contained panic. "Marcus, honey, let's not do this here," she said, trying to maintain some semblance of control. "We already told Sophia's family that everything was taken care of for the evening." I shrugged, a single shoulder raise and drop that conveyed my complete indifference to their social embarrassment. Then I guess someone better take care of it. The waiter was now visibly uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot while clutching the black folder in front of him like it was a shield. "So who should I give the check to then?" he asked, looking around the table for someone to take responsibility. I nodded toward the main table where 21 other people were sitting. "Anyone but me." Tyler stood up at that point, color rising in his face as his carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The mask of sophisticated real estate mogul was slipping away to reveal the entitled child that had always been underneath. "Are you seriously going to screw us over in front of her family after everything we've done for you?" he demanded. That line was so incredibly rich it could have bought its own table at this restaurant. But I didn't respond or engage with his tantrum. I didn't dignify it with an argument or explanation. I just picked up my coat from the back of the chair, retrieved the unopened bottle of champagne I had brought that no one had even acknowledged, and turned toward the exit. As I walked away, I heard Tyler's voice again, louder this time with a clear edge of panic creeping into his tone. "Wow, you're really just walking out? Just like that?" I paused at the threshold of the restaurant, turned just enough to deliver a parting line that wasn't shouted or dramatic, just completely matter-of-fact. "Yeah, I'm done picking up the tab." And with that, I walked out into the night air, leaving them to figure out how to handle a $5,141.87 bill without their usual safety net. I let the engagement dinner incident sit for a few days without saying anything or responding to their increasingly frantic calls and texts. I figured that silence would do more damage than anything I could possibly say at that point. But I kept my ears open through Uncle Rick and a few mutual acquaintances, and it didn't take long for things to start completely unraveling. The first crack in Tyler's facade came about 6 days after the dinner, when I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost sent it straight to voicemail, but something made me answer it. It was Sophia, Tyler's now ex-fiancée, and her voice wasn't what I had expected at all. There were no tears, no hysterics, no accusations flying around. She sounded completely calm and controlled, like someone who had already processed the emotional breakdown and moved directly into damage control mode. It was the voice of someone who had been raised with enough money to know that emotions are always secondary to protecting your assets. She asked me without any preamble if I had invested $12,000 into Tyler's real estate company and whether I was acting as a silent partner, as he had claimed to her and her family. She said it very directly, like she was simply confirming a fact that she already suspected was completely false. "No," I said simply, without any elaboration or defensiveness. She went quiet for a beat, and I could hear nothing but soft breathing on the line. Then she explained the situation with the same detached precision you'd expect from a corporate lawyer handling a business dispute. Her father had put $210,000 into Tyler's supposed company based largely on the strength of Tyler's claim that I was backing the venture financially and operationally. Tyler had shown them official-looking investment documents with my name, my signature, and my supposed role as operations director clearly listed. It turns out that Tyler had taken an old lease agreement I'd signed years ago, scanned my signature from that document, and then just pasted it everywhere like he was playing some kind of real estate Mad Lib. That signature was completely forged, and so was the entire story surrounding it. I didn't react with shock or outrage when she told me this. I just calmly confirmed again that I had no involvement whatsoever with any of Tyler's business ventures and never had. I had never signed any investment documents, never agreed to any advisory role, and had never invested a single dime in any official capacity with his so-called company. Sophia thanked me for the confirmation in a voice that had dropped about 15 degrees colder than when the conversation started. Then she mentioned, almost casually, that the engagement was officially off and that her father's legal team would be in touch with Tyler directly to discuss the fraudulent use of my identity and forged documents. Over the next week, more calls started trickling in from other people who had been caught up in Tyler's web of lies. First was Connor, Tyler's college friend who had gone on to actually build a successful construction company in the real world. He had invested $75,000 in Tyler's phantom business based on the same forged documents. Then came a guy named Ethan, who had met Tyler at some networking event and put in $35,000. There was also a woman named Victoria, who had apparently dated Tyler briefly about 3 years earlier, and had invested $18,000 in what she thought was a private investment opportunity with guaranteed returns. All of these investments were based on documents that featured my forged signature. All of them were based on the exact same story, that I, the stable employed brother with actual assets and a solid reputation, was involved as a silent partner and financial guarantor for Tyler's business ventures. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Tyler hadn't just been using me as a personal ATM for all these years. He had been systematically using my reputation, my work history, and my financial stability as the foundation for an elaborate house of cards. The one thing I had actually built in my life, a reputation as someone who paid his debts and kept his word, he had been weaponizing against other innocent people while simultaneously treating me like garbage. This wasn't just mooching or taking advantage of family generosity anymore. This was criminal fraud with my name and signature attached to it. If I stayed silent and did nothing, I might as well be complicit in what he was doing to these other victims. I spent an entire weekend systematically gathering evidence against Tyler. I had all the people who had contacted me forward every single document that Tyler had sent them over the months and years. I created a detailed timeline of investments and claims made, collected copies of text messages and emails where he had referenced me or my supposed involvement in his business ventures, and built a complete picture of the fraud without ever contacting Tyler or my parents directly. Then, on Wednesday morning, I drove to the county sheriff's office. I walked in wearing my work clothes with no appointment and no lawyer and asked to speak to someone about financial fraud. I was directed to a detective who looked like he had seen every scam imaginable and was thoroughly tired of dealing with all of them. I laid everything out without any emotion or drama. I didn't get into the family backstory, didn't mention the engagement dinner, or explain the years of being financially used and disrespected. I just stuck to the facts. My identity had been used to commit financial fraud against multiple victims, and here was all the evidence I had gathered to prove it. I left the thick folder with all the documentation and my contact information, then drove to work without telling anyone in my family what I had just done. I simply waited to see what would happen next. A week later, Tyler got served with papers. Connor had already filed charges for wire fraud and misrepresentation based on the evidence I had provided. Sophia's father followed suit once he realized there were other victims involved and that this was part of a larger pattern of fraud. The detective I had spoken to called to let me know they were building a comprehensive case and would need a formal statement from me as the identity theft victim. When investigators started digging into Tyler's activities, they discovered he had been almost laughably lazy with his fraud operation. He had been reusing the same basic investment documents for multiple victims, just changing dates and dollar amounts, but keeping my forged signature in the exact same position on each form. He used the same fake company address, the same bogus financial projections with just the numbers adjusted, and the same fabricated business plan across all his scam attempts. 4 days after Tyler was served with the legal papers, Mom finally sent me a text message. She didn't ask what was happening or why Tyler was suddenly facing serious legal trouble. Instead, she simply requested that I come over to the house and talk it out with him. She said the situation was getting out of hand and that we needed to present a united front as a family during this difficult time. Her proposed solution, which she outlined in subsequent messages, was apparently for me to accompany them to Sophia's father's office and explain that the whole thing was just a misunderstanding that had gotten blown completely out of proportion. She still thought this entire criminal fraud case could be managed, contained, and spun into something other than what it actually was. She had absolutely no idea how far past that point we already were, or how many other victims and law enforcement agencies were now involved. On Thursday afternoon, I pulled into my parents' driveway without calling ahead or responding to the multiple messages asking me to come over and help fix the situation. I just showed up when I knew they would all be there, ready to have this final confrontation on my own terms. The house looked exactly the same as always. A 2-story colonial with the pretentious pillars that Mom had insisted on adding during the last renovation she'd made me pay for. Dad's leased BMW was in the driveway next to Mom's white Lexus SUV. And Tyler's Audi was there too, complete with the vanity license plate referencing some inside joke that no one actually understood. I walked in without knocking, treating it like the family house it supposedly was. I found them all in the living room, and the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Tyler looked like absolute hell. Unshaven, with dark circles under bloodshot eyes, wearing what appeared to be the same track pants and hoodie for multiple days in a row. He was pacing back and forth on the designer rug like a caged animal, stopping occasionally to check his phone as if waiting for some message that would magically solve all of his problems. Mom was perched on the edge of the couch with her back ramrod straight, hands clutching a coffee cup that had clearly gone cold hours ago. She had obviously dressed for this occasion in what she considered serious discussion attire. A cashmere cardigan and pearls, with her hair freshly styled as if maintaining appearances could somehow hold back the tsunami that was heading straight for their carefully constructed facade. Dad sat in his leather recliner looking suddenly much older than I remembered. The lines in his face seemed deeper, and he was still wearing his Thursday golf clothes despite the March chill outside, as if maintaining his normal routine could somehow prevent their world from completely falling apart. They all looked up when I entered the room, and Mom immediately stood up with relief washing over her face like I was some kind of savior arriving to fix everything. "Marcus, thank goodness," she began, her voice rushing with desperate hope. "We've been trying to reach you. This whole thing has gotten completely out of control, and Tyler's been—" I cut her off by placing a thick manila folder on the glass coffee table. The sound it made, a flat, decisive thud, silenced the room instantly. "I turned all of this into the county sheriff's office last Wednesday," I said, my voice even and completely calm. "They're building a case against Tyler for multiple counts of fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud across state lines." The folder contained everything. Printouts of the forged documents with my signature highlighted in bright yellow, detailed statements from all the various victims explaining how much they had invested and what they had been promised. Screenshots of text messages where Tyler had referenced me as his business partner, and copies of bank statements showing exactly where the money had gone. I had spent days putting it all together, making sure every detail was crystal clear and every connection was thoroughly documented. I wanted them to see exactly what I had seen, to understand the full scope of what Tyler had done while they enabled and protected him. Tyler exploded first, exactly as I knew he would. He launched into a furious tirade about how I was ruining his life, how I had always been jealous of him, and how I should have just backed him when he needed it instead of letting things get to this point. "You could have just signed on," he shouted, spittle flying from his mouth. "It would have cost you nothing, and everyone would have made money. But no, you had to be self-righteous about it. You had to play the honest working man while stabbing your own brother in the back." I didn't respond to his tantrum or engage with any of his accusations. I just stood there with my arms at my sides, watching the performance with the detached interest of someone observing an animal having a meltdown at the zoo. His desperation was palpable, and his attempts to shift blame were exactly what I had expected. Mom tried to step in next, always playing the mediator, always looking for the compromise that would somehow maintain the family illusion and make this all go away. "There has to be a way to fix this," she said, her voice wavering between authoritative and pleading. "Maybe you could make a statement saying that you had initially agreed to be part of the business, but there was a misunderstanding about the extent of your involvement, or that you had verbally authorized Tyler to act on your behalf in certain situations." I looked directly at her, really seeing her for perhaps the first time in years. "I'm not lying for him," I said flatly. "Not again, not for money, not for peace, and not for family. If you contact me about this situation again, I'll add witness tampering and harassment to the case file." Dad finally spoke up, his voice cracking with emotion. "You'd really let your brother go to jail? Your own blood?" "He put himself there," I replied without hesitation. "I'm just not pulling him out this time." I turned and walked toward the door without another word, leaving them to process what I had just told them. Behind me, I heard Tyler's voice crack with something between pure rage and genuine fear. "You're dead to me, you hear that? Dead." I didn't look back or acknowledge his threat. I just kept walking, leaving the folder on the table with all the evidence of years of lies and manipulation clearly laid out for them to see. I left the house that had never really felt like a home to me, and I left the people who had never really been family in any way that actually mattered. As I drove away from that house for what I knew would be the last time, I felt something I hadn't expected. It wasn't satisfaction or vindication like you might think. Instead, it was a strange kind of peace, like finally putting down a weight that I had been carrying for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight and breathe freely. 3 weeks later, the criminal charges became official. Tyler took a plea deal rather than risk going to trial and facing even more serious consequences. He got 16 months in a minimum security facility, plus restitution orders that he would never realistically be able to fulfill. During the investigation, authorities discovered that he had already set up offshore bank accounts and converted a significant portion of the stolen money into untraceable cryptocurrency before being caught. My parents narrowly avoided facing criminal charges themselves, though prosecutors couldn't definitively prove they had known about the fraud, despite some highly suspicious financial movements in their accounts that suggested they might have been more involved than they claimed. 7 months passed after the criminal charges were finalized, and I used that time to completely rebuild my life without the constant financial drain that my family had represented for so many years. I took Luna to the Florida Keys for a week-long vacation, and I proposed to her on a beach overlooking the Gulf of Mexico. There was no audience, no cameras, and no social media announcement. Just the two of us and a moment that actually mattered. She said yes without any hesitation, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I was building something real with someone who genuinely cared about me. I spent time fixing up my house properly, finally investing in all the improvements I had been putting off while sending money to my family. I built a serious home gym in the basement with equipment that would last for decades, the kind of setup that most commercial gyms would be jealous of. In those 6 months, I managed to put away more money than I had saved in the previous 3 years combined. My life developed a steady rhythm that wasn't constantly dictated by other people's manufactured emergencies and financial crises. Then things got interesting in a way I hadn't expected. In late May, I got a call from Uncle Rick with his typical no-nonsense approach. "Thought you should know what's been happening," he said without any preamble or small talk. Tyler ran one last scam from inside his holding cell. He laid out the situation with military precision, giving me all the facts in chronological order. Tyler had been running an even bigger and more elaborate scam from inside his pre-sentencing holding period. He had somehow convinced my parents that with enough money, he could make a deal to avoid jail time entirely. Some elaborate story about a high-priced legal fixer who had connections with the judge, the prosecutor, and even some of the victims who had been defrauded. My parents, who were apparently desperate to avoid the public shame and social embarrassment of having a son in prison, had fallen for this story completely. They had taken out a second mortgage on their house, emptied what remained of their retirement accounts, and borrowed money from friends and extended family members who still believed their version of events. All told, they had somehow scraped together just over $135,000 for this supposed legal miracle worker who would make all their problems disappear. Of course, there was no fixer and no secret deal with anyone. Tyler had directed all of that money into an offshore account that he controlled. Then he had used just enough of it to make a partial restitution payment to Sophia's father. The bare minimum needed to keep additional federal charges from being filed against him. The rest of the money had simply vanished, presumably stashed away somewhere for his eventual release from prison. Now my parents were facing bankruptcy, foreclosure on their house, and possible criminal charges themselves for signing fraudulent loan documents to raise the money. Their house was literally weeks away from being put up for auction. Dad's leased car had already been repossessed from the country club parking lot, which had to be the ultimate public humiliation in their particular social circle. "They're going to come to you," Rick said finally, stating what we both knew was inevitable. "Thought you should know what to expect." I thanked him for the heads up and hung up the phone. I didn't feel the satisfaction that some people might expect me to have in this situation. Instead, there was just a hollow confirmation of what I had already known about the fundamental family dynamic, that it would continue its dysfunctional patterns with or without my participation, and that they would never learn from their mistakes or take responsibility for their choices. But that night, I made some important phone calls. First, I contacted my company's legal team to make sure I understood all my options and potential liabilities. Then I called a private investigator I had used when vetting subcontractors for some renovation work I had done in the past. Finally, I contacted a real estate agent who specialized in distressed property investments. A few days later, the doorbell rang at 10:30 in the morning on a Saturday. As expected, I found my parents standing on my porch, looking like weathered and beaten-down versions of their former selves. I let them into my house without saying a word. Luna was heading out to the gym and gave me a silent squeeze of support on my shoulder as she passed by. I appreciated her giving me the space to handle this final confrontation on my own terms. They sat awkwardly on the edge of my couch, and the silence stretched out uncomfortably until Dad finally broke it. He began explaining their situation in detail: the foreclosure proceedings, the crushing debt they had accumulated, the complete collapse of everything they had built over the years, and Tyler's final betrayal that had left them with absolutely nothing. "We have nowhere else to go," Dad finally admitted, and I could tell that saying those words was costing him everything he had left in terms of pride. We could lose everything we've worked for. We're still your family, Mom added, with tears carefully held in check. We made mistakes, but we love you. I looked at both of them for a long moment before responding. Love doesn't come with a price tag, I said calmly. And if it did, you would have maxed out your credit limit with me a long time ago. I reached into my desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope, sliding it across the coffee table without any explanation. What's this? Mom asked, not moving to actually take it. Open it, I replied simply. Inside the envelope were printouts, mortgage documents, transfer of deed paperwork, and settlement statements. All legal documentation showing that their house, the same one that was scheduled for foreclosure auction in just 4 weeks, had been purchased by an LLC registered in Nevada. My LLC, which I had created 6 days earlier with the help of my company's legal team. I had bought their mortgage debt directly from the bank at a 35% discount. It was a distressed property investment made possible by all those years of saving money while they were spending it on maintaining their fake lifestyle and enabling Tyler's criminal behavior. I own your house now, I explained matter-of-factly. Technically, you're my tenants. I watched their faces transform from desperate hope to confusion to absolute horror as the full implications of what I was telling them began to sink in. What? This can't… Are you evicting us? Mom asked, her voice barely above a whisper. No, I'm teaching you how the real world actually works, I replied. I handed them a second envelope. This is a lease agreement. 1-year term, $1,100 monthly rent, which is well below market value for that neighborhood. You'll both get jobs, you'll pay your rent on time every month, and you'll save whatever you can manage. After 15 months of perfect payment history, I'll sell you the house back at exactly what I paid for it, if you can qualify for a mortgage by then. Dad started to object, but I cut him off with a raised hand. The alternative is immediate eviction, and you can explain to your remaining friends why you're living in a motel on the interstate. Your choice. The room went completely silent for several long moments. Where are we supposed to get $100 a month? Mom finally asked, her voice small and defeated. Target is hiring, so is Walmart. The Amazon warehouse starts at $19 an hour with full benefits. Construction sites always need laborers, I said with a shrug. Welcome to how the other half lives. And Tyler? She asked, unable to stop herself from bringing up her golden child one more time. Tyler doesn't exist to me anymore, and he's never setting foot on any property that I own. That includes this house now. His name isn't on the lease agreement, and if he shows up at the property, you're all in violation of the terms and out on the street immediately. Consider it a restraining order with actual teeth. After some hesitation and whispered conversation between them, they signed the lease agreement on the spot. There was no further negotiation, no tears, and no dramatic speeches. Just the scratch of pen on paper and the cold reality of their new circumstances slowly sinking in. As they were getting ready to leave, Dad paused at the threshold and turned back to me. Why help us at all after everything that's happened? I considered the question for a moment before answering. I'm not helping you, I said finally. I'm breaking the cycle. You raised a son who can't function in the real world because you never had to face reality yourselves. Now you're all going to learn what life actually costs when you can't just outsource the bill to someone else. They left my house in complete silence, closing the door behind them without another word. Luna returned about an hour later with her gym bag slung over her shoulder. They gone? She asked, grabbing a protein shake from the refrigerator. Yes. Think they'll make it? She asked, taking a long drink. I shrugged. Not my problem anymore. The strangest part about the whole situation was that it didn't feel like revenge. This wasn't some elaborate scheme to get back at them for years of mistreatment. This was simply allowing natural consequences to occur while removing myself from the equation entirely. During the first month after our confrontation, my parents acted like they were living in some kind of dystopian nightmare. Mom sent me text messages almost daily with pictures of Dad in his new uniform at Lowe's and photos of herself behind the customer service desk at CVS. Her messages were full of barely disguised martyrdom, as if I was supposed to be shocked or feel guilty that they were actually working retail jobs at their age. I didn't respond to any of these messages. I simply had my property management company confirm when their rent payments came in on time each month. No praise, no commentary, no acknowledgement, just straightforward business transactions. By the 4th month, the martyr act started to fade away. Dad actually began mentioning that he liked some aspects of his job at Lowe's. He appreciated the clear structure, the straightforward expectations, and the fact that when his shift ended, he could actually leave work behind and go home. Mom discovered that she had a genuine knack for customer service once she got over the initial humiliation of working what she considered to be beneath her social status. She found that she was good at helping people solve their problems, and there was something satisfying about that. When their one-year lease was up, I renewed it for another 15 months at exactly the same rate. They had been perfect tenants. Rent always paid on time, property well-maintained, and absolutely no drama or complaints. Dad had even been promoted to department supervisor at Lowe's, and Mom had moved from CVS to a better-paying office administration role at a local insurance company. For perhaps the first time in their adult lives, they were building something real and sustainable based on what they could actually earn rather than what they could borrow, bluff, or manipulate others into providing. My door isn't locked to them anymore, but the ATM is permanently closed and will never reopen. I've learned that respect is something that must be earned, not bought, not inherited through blood relations, and not tied to family obligations. It's simply earned through consistent actions and mutual consideration. Family, I've come to understand, isn't really about shared blood or having the same last name. True family is about who actually shows up when you're at your absolute worst. It's about who helps without keeping a running tally or expecting something in return. It's about who sees your value as a human being beyond what you can provide for them financially or otherwise. By that definition, I had found my real family, and it had absolutely nothing to do with the people who had raised me. Luna, Uncle Rick, and the few genuine friends I had made over the years. These were the people who had proven themselves through their actions, not their words or their claims about family loyalty. Looking back on everything that happened, from the engagement dinner disaster to Tyler's criminal fraud to my parents' financial collapse and eventual rehabilitation, I realized that the most important thing I learned was how to set boundaries and stick to them. For years, I had confused enabling with love and obligation with family loyalty. I had thought that constantly rescuing them from the consequences of their own choices was what family members were supposed to do for each other. But real love sometimes means allowing people to experience the natural consequences of their decisions. Real family support sometimes means refusing to enable destructive behavior, even when, especially when, that refusal is difficult and painful for everyone involved. The cycle is broken now. Tyler is serving his time and will have to rebuild his life from scratch when he gets out, assuming he's learned anything from the experience. My parents are learning what it means to work for what they have and to live within their actual means rather than their fantasies. And I'm finally free to build a life based on my own values and choices, surrounded by people who value me for who I am rather than what I can give them. Sometimes the best thing you can do for people you care about is to stop solving their problems for them. Sometimes love looks like walking away. And sometimes family isn't the people who share your DNA. It's the people who choose to stand by you when everything falls apart, without expecting anything in return except your genuine friendship and respect. That's the family worth having. And that's the lesson that took me far too long to learn.